Today I want to talk about the juvenile conduct of some of our elected officials up in Washington, D.C., who have made a habit of acting like spoilt children when they don't get their way, kind of like the playground bully, forcing his rule over others by intimidation and authoritarian rule, communication and compromise virtually non-existent. I currently have an issue on guns and due process. Let's take a look at due process a minute and point out that the establishment of the no-fly list and individuals being placed on the no-fly list occurs without due process. A law enforcement investigation simply establishes that there is or may be probable cause for a case to proceed against an individual in court. Due process allows for the individual the right to defend oneself against accusation, examine evidence, question witnesses, the accuser, to question him or her in a court of law before a judge and a jury of peers. Being put on a terror watch list is a part of a law enforcement tool from investigation phase up to and including arrest after probable cause is established. Being added to a no-fly list removes a right of the individual which inhibits or restricts the individual's right of freedom of movement and, in many cases, also association. Presently, an individual does not have the ability to go to court before such a right is removed in the respect of the no-fly list and has no reasonable access to the court, nor is it cost prohibitive for the average individual. Removal of rights without court is a due process violation. Now, every man, woman, and child, every age group, every race, every nationality, every sexual orientation needs to understand that a no-fly list without due process basically infringes or violates the rights of the individual. And you need to ask yourself, if we don't demand from our legislatures that due process always be a consideration when it comes to the individual right, then we have to ask, when and where do these infringements on due process begin and where do they end? Without due process, there is no court. Without due process, there's no opportunity to defend yourself if someone accuses you of committing a crime. The government simply has the right to send you to jail and also to impose punishment simply based upon an accusation alone. This is not the America that we want. We do not want a government which has that power. Artemis, New Mexico Immigration Detention Center. Also, there's a case that was known as MSPC and others versus Jay Johnson, Secretary of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and others. This case determined that mass deportations without access to a lawyer, knowledge of one's rights, and the opportunity to present claims deprived immigrants crossing our borders illegally, violated the Due Process Clause and the rights of non-U.S. citizens. And I asked legislatures in Washington, how is the regulations put into place by President Obama in respect to veterans suffering from PTSD who have committed no crime, and any other group that has a medical issue? How is the regulations that were put in place and a no-fly list without U.S. citizens being afforded the same opportunity to access to lawyers, knowledge of rights, knowledge of the charges and the accusations against them, and the right to confront the accuser, anything less than depriving U.S. citizens the right to due process. Attempting to pass legislation that fails to include due process is a constitutional violation that not only deprives right, but also fails miserably the equality of treatment to all that some legislators in Washington, D.C. never fail to point out they uphold and believe. Now, there is absolutely no equality where no due process exists for non-U.S. citizens, and due process is affirmed for non-U.S. citizens. Yes, the numbers do show we want responsible gun control measures, but as a nation, we do not want gun control without due process. The Second Amendment did not grant the right to keep and bear arms. That is a misnomer. The right to keep and bear arms was taken by the people before the Declaration of Independence was drafted, before the Declaration was presented to the Crown, before the battle to become a free and sovereign nation, before the drafting and the signing of the Constitution, before the enactment of the Bill of Rights and any of its subsequent amendments. The Second Amendment is simply the acknowledgement and affirmation by this government, by our nation, that the people had secured that right unto themselves already, and clearly identifies the purposes to which the people had secured that right before the foundation of this government and before this nation existed. Let's make this go viral, people. Let's make sure our politicians in Washington know what we expect from this day forward when it comes to their conduct in drafting legislation. We're sick and tired of children pretending to be adults.